TGIF, it's a Friday. It's the last day of January, January 31st, 2025. Well, January will be in the books after today. What will February bring? Well, I couldn't help but putting this up here because that's kind of how I have felt over the last couple of mornings. And this is how I feel this morning and really for the next couple of weeks ahead. There's a lot going on here, and Blazing Saddle fans can remember this scene. Trying to figure out the confusion of what's going on because it is going to be a smorgasbord of weather. Just a lot to digest. And I just have to warn you, a lot of people watch this podcast in different places in the West, and everyone's going to experience something different. This is one of these situations where we cannot paint everything with one or two brushes. So there's a lot to keep track of. As I just mentioned, it all depends on where you are. Your perception of the weather over the next week in some areas will be, wow, it's warm. Wow, it's like spring. Some of you will say, wow, it's like the Arctic. Some of you will say, I wish it would snow. Some of you are going to say, I wish it would quit snowing. It's going to be that different across the region. So we've got all of those things I just listed right there. And we're going to kind of break things up in three pieces. I think it's a better way to kind of understand what's going to happen over the next couple of weeks because we're going to have phase 1 this weekend into early next week, phase 2 late next week, phase 3 next weekend, and through Valentine's Day. Check weather before traveling because you might leave one area that's really warm and mild and like spring, and you might drive into winter. So make sure you check where you're going and check the weather from point A to point B. Complicating things is we have something we don't see too often, at least this graphically, but the stratospheric warming trends, which we sometimes talk about, there's a very interesting pattern developing in a couple of weeks that we want to show you. Now there is a picture for you. Rush hour in Sublette County. Check out some of those bulls. Wow. Beautiful shot. Thanks, Dave, for sending that in. That's just a classic Sublette County scene right there. Satellite imagery this morning, we're going to kind of focus in on the Pacific, especially when we see the lows that are forming. We've got the low up here off the coast of British Columbia. We've got this other low back here north of Hawaii. Here's the high pressure that we enjoyed. Here's that low pressure system that brought some rain and snow to eastern Colorado and parts of the plains yesterday. It's going to bring flooding and heavy rains and snow into parts of the east as it moves away. But we're going to be concentrating on this very large area of the earth right here. There's Arctic air up here in Canada. Here's all the Pacific moisture coming in, and you can really see it on the water vapor. The water vapor is showing very well the plume of Pacific moisture that's coming into the region. The first plume coming into the Pacific Northwest this morning. This deeper plume of moisture is going to feed. It's just like a pipeline. We talked about an atmospheric river yesterday. Well, here it is forming. And when we look at the jet stream winds, now this is across the Pacific. So here are the Aleutians. Here's the west coast of North America. So you can see here's the first interjection of the atmospheric river pushing into Washington, Oregon, and Northern California today. Look at this broad area of high-level winds. This is at 30,000 feet. This is going to just come in and direct itself right towards the west coast. So we're just going to drive a lot of deep moisture into the west coast region. When we take a look at advisories over the course of the next 24 to 36 hours, the pink are winter storm warnings. The purples are winter weather advisories. The dark blue are winter storm watches. These are flood watches here for central and northern California. The brown along the front range of the mountains, well, you could surmise, east of the mountains, east of the Sierra, then east of the Rockies, you're going to have high winds that are going to be developing today, tonight, tomorrow, and through the weekend. So just envision deep Pacific winds coming off the water from the surface all the way up to 30,000 feet, coming in and hitting the mountains and dumping the snow, and then making it very windy along east of the divide and east of the mountains and near the front range of the mountains and the Rocky Mountain front. So there's a lot going on here. Now, there's also areas that are white that aren't under any advisories. That doesn't mean there won't be bad weather. This area in particular, I think, is going to be a travel problem in Wyoming along Interstate 80 this weekend. When we take a look and focus in, you can see the high wind forecast for Cody, down to Matiti there, the Du Bois area, South Pass area, then through Casper Douglas, I-25, I-80. And we've got a lot to deal with. Now, as we go and take a look at where we're going to be, this is by 11 a.m. this morning. We see that low settling into the Pacific Northwest. Generally, mild air will flow into the region again today, but the winds will pick up. So this is today, and this is Monday. Notice that upper low, that omega pattern, is just kind of stalling things out. But look at this flow. If you were to get on a plane and go from Portland to New York, boy, you've got a tailwind there. And this straight line flow comes over the water, grabs the moisture, drives it in. So very, very heavy snows over a several day period will be hitting the mountains. Overrunning the Arctic air up here is going to produce snow, as you'll see here in a moment. If you're kind of south of this line right here, you're in the mild air. You're in the very mild, dry air coming out of the deserts. You're in the cold, moist air up here. This is why there's just like a dividing line between weather elements. This is the precipitation forecast through 5 p.m. Monday. Here are the overrunning snows in Montana, the Dakotas, and southern Canada. We might see these deeper overrunning snows get a little bit further south, maybe along Interstate 90. We got to watch this. If you're in northeastern Wyoming, western South Dakota, that heavy snow may just go north of you or it could slip in. We also have this other little patch of snow that could come out along the Pine Ridge area as we get into late Sunday and into early Monday. But you can see the darker colors where the heavier precipitation will form. So from the northern mountains of Utah through western Wyoming, western Montana, the mountains of Idaho, along I-80 here, the Tahoe area, we're just going to get a lot going on. But as you can see all the white down here, this is where you're going to be warm, dry, and windy. The battle zone between air masses is where the forecast gets more murky, where it could be changing on a dime depending on what these air masses want to do and shift. Just a little bit of a shift, 20, 30, 50 miles makes a big difference. And there's the snowfall forecast through Monday. So this is the first segment of our 3-segmented forecast. So we'll watch for what will be significant snow in parts of Montana, the Dakotas, the western parts of Wyoming. The I-80 corridor of Wyoming will have heavy winds, and it may not be continuous snow here, but South Pass will be a problem going around the southern mountains. Look at the Evanston area here, Uintah County up to Kemmer, Star Valley, Afton. Then as you get down a little bit lower, it'll be warm enough to be rain along some sections of Interstate 80 further west. These are the wind speeds, the wind gusts. So you can see why we have high wind warnings in effect as those strong jet stream winds come through. A lot of wind throughout all of the western side of the United States. Take a look at these temperature contrasts. This is for 11 a.m. on Monday Mountain Time. Look at the temperatures up here in southern Canada, Montana. This is noon, basically. Very, very cold air, below zero. Well below zero across almost all of Montana, getting into parts of northern Wyoming. But look at the contrast in temperatures. If we were to focus in, I think this is pretty reasonable, and this is probably what's going to happen. -8 in Sheridan, 58 in Cheyenne, 60s in Denver. So you've got 60s in Denver, -8 below zero up here in Sheridan and Billings. Sub-zero temperatures and cold air could sneak into the Bighorn Basin. You see that little push? You could have Arctic air come into the Bighorn Basin but get hung up on the Owl Creek Mountains there. So you have, when you get a contrast like this, it is the Wild West. You see this line right here? This is the North Platte River boundary. Basically what it's showing is during the day Monday, cold air gets into the North Platte Valley but can't climb the Cheyenne Ridge in the higher terrain and gets stalled there. So this is why you have to check the weather where you're going to. Because if you were to go start your drive here, I'm going to go to Sheridan. Whoa, you're driving through a 50-degree temperature change. And you're going to likely go from dry, windy roads to icy, snow-covered roads. As we go out further in the next week, only by Thursday does that low kind of start to get unstuck and starts to push further south. So now we're entering phase 2. Phase 2 is all of this cold, moist air slowly starts to migrate south. So by the second half of next week, The strong, moist jet stream winds continue. The Arctic air gets a bigger push south, so the wintry weather that's been in the northern areas starts to come down here during the second half of next week, and here it is. It's coming down further south now, and coming further south not only is the better chance of precipitation, but we're also going to see going into Southern California. They'll need to watch this. This could be a headache. Too much of a good thing in Southern California next week. We'll need to watch that. But all of this I'm showing you is green for the precipitation, but it's going to be snow. The Arctic air, this is by next Saturday, is still hanging around up here, persistently cold up near the border. See the pinkish color here? Well, the Arctic air is now coming further south. So by late next week, with the Arctic air further south, east of the divide now, and the Pacific moisture coming on in, well, you're going to get snowfall further south. Then by next Saturday, high pressure starts to build up. We get a little bit more of a trough shape, allowing more cold air to filter south. And then this wave is going to continue to be right there. Watch the trajectory of the airflow. It's going over the water, coming on into land. We can really see that by next Monday and Tuesday, the 10th and the 11th. A Pacific flow of air comes in, but Arctic air is getting back into the game. So we're going to see a tug of war between air masses. Some of you, especially along and south of Interstate 80, are going to have mild days. You go further north, it's going to be a lot colder. But then everybody gets into the cold by next weekend and early next week, the week following. Around the 10th, 11th, we're going to see a lot of the nation get very cold again, with the coldest of the cold centered in the far west. So if you're down here lamenting how warm it is and the lack of winter, you will get your chance. You just got to wait here a little bit longer. The next 15 days, precipitation totals look like this on the European model. It's even higher on some of the other models, so this one is actually a little bit conservative. Look at the snow in the mountains of Colorado and the mountains of Wyoming, and look at the amounts of precipitation. We're nearing 20 inches of water in the Sierra Nevada here. And then here's the rains getting down into Southern California and maybe finally into Arizona as well. So we've got a lot going on, a lot to go and take a look at. And then if we were to convert this to snow, 124 inches of snow, maybe, we'll see, over a 2-week period. I think it's on the table. This is somewhat similar to what happened a couple of times in the winter of 2023 when we started to get these atmospheric rivers. Once you start to get the Pacific and you mix it with the Arctic, it is the Wild West weather-wise. So we'll have more for you on Monday. In the meantime, if you're a weather watcher, enjoy watching the weather. And this is the one last thing I wanted to show you. What I'm showing you here is the stratosphere. This is the lower stratosphere, so we're talking up around 60,000 feet roughly. And what we're seeing is a 15-day loop of where the warm pockets and the cold pockets of air are in the stratosphere. And when the stratosphere gets these bright colors, the red, the pinks there, that's when the stratosphere warms up. The blues and the greens is where the stratosphere is really cold. When you start to see these warming trends, you start to displace the very cold Arctic air at the higher latitudes to lower latitudes. And what we're looking at here is a stratospheric split. If you look right here at the end, you'll see that we have a split. And if we take a look at what happens, this is right around Valentine's Day. When you see this big warm up over the pole, basically, so here's your North Pole, here's your highest latitude Arctic Circle regions. This warmer stratosphere expands. The expansion of the stratosphere causes the whole atmosphere to expand and pushes down on the ground and pushes the Arctic air off the poles. And it pushes the air, this type of thing pushes the Arctic air in all 4 directions. So basically, the whole northern hemisphere down to the mid-latitudes globally could get a lot colder towards the middle of February in many locations. It'll be something very interesting to watch. Ultimately, what it is, it's a cold signal. It's a colder than average signal, especially for the western United States, because a lot of this warmth in the stratosphere right here will displace the Arctic air that's here and want to put it here. So something to watch, something fun in the higher reaches of the atmosphere that does affect us down here. It's amazing. Things that are thousands of miles away will drive our weather, like the ocean, and things that are miles above us will affect us as well. A lot to keep track of.